Page 10.
Okay.
First answer.
I can get this up where I can use it.
On page 10.
Nice having this to be able to go back and forth.
On page 10. I have the
Yeah.
foolishness.
It's working. Okay, this is the 1 Corinthians class. And we're on page 11 in the textbook. I don't need this for right now. Page 11, Roman numeral 6, capital C, towards the bottom of the page. And that is chapter 3 of 1 Corinthians. Okay, all right. So we begin with, well, just by way of a quick review, Roman numeral 6, capital A. He defines carnality. He tells them that carnal Christians are babes in Christ. They cannot eat but only the milk of the word, not the meat, the deeper things. He said, I couldn't come into you, as spiritual, but as carnal. Then indicators of carnality would be envying, strife, and divisions. Christian partisanship and its error was verses 4 through 5. Then he talked about the church as a field, the process of growing a church planted by Paul, watered or irrigated, if you will, by Apollos, but only God can make it grow. The field laborers receive their pay in verse 8, but the field and the crops belong to God, verse 9, first part of that verse. Now we're at capital C. The church is a building, verse 9b through verse 17. Let's just read 9 and 10. Chapter 3, verse 9. For we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry. Ye are God's building. According to the grace of God, which is given unto me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another buildeth thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. So how the building is built is verse 10. Paul laid a proper, strong, and level foundation. Can anybody remember what the foundation is of the church? Same as the founder, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Everything is to be built on Christ.
Yeah.
Salvation first, the foundation. Christ as Jewish Messiah, Christ as Savior of Jew and Gentile both. That's what the church is built on. It's not built on a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
It's not built on the deacons. It's not built on the members. It's built on Christ.
Yeah.
And only God can build the church. People can do the labor, but only God can build the church. If he doesn't want that church to thrive, it's not going to thrive. And so that's what Paul is telling us here. According to the grace of God, which is given unto me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation. So Paul laid the foundation. How? He started that church. We're in chapter 3, verse 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 10. Yep. Okay. So how the building is built, small a, Paul laid a proper, strong, and level foundation. B, those who build on it better build well. And verse 11 tells us the foundation can only be Christ, not a person. I've seen large churches that were built on, not by charismatics, Pentecostals and that. A charismatic person, which is a person that comes across, people like them, they like that person, they follow that person. But I've seen huge churches of 3, 4, 5, 7, 10,000 members that when the pastor died, the church split. They just split. Why? Because too many of the people were coming because of that pastor, not because of Christ. I think it was the other night in service. Where did I hear that? That people came from miles around to hear Whitfield preach. And he had
That was Luke.
That was Luke in service. That's what I thought the other night. They came from miles around to hear Whitfield preach, and he had a guest preacher that night. So when they all came and they found out Whitfield wasn't going to be preaching, a bunch of them got up to leave.
Oh, wow.
And the guy got up and said, now those that came to worship Whitfield, you can leave now. But those that came to worship God, you can stay. Because those that got up to leave, they didn't come to worship God. They came to worship Whitfield. And so the church is not built on the pastor. The pastor is simply the under shepherd that does what the owner of the flock, God, tells him to do. Christ is the head of the church. The pastor is simply the one that helps carry out the logistics and make sure the church is going in the right direction. So the foundation can only be Christ. Verse 11. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Then verses 12 to 15, he tells us the erecting of the building on the foundation. So the foundation, Paul laid the foundation, Jesus Christ. Remember earlier he said, for I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. That was laying the foundation of that church. Now the erecting of the building on the foundation, verse 12, there are many different building materials, verse 12. Now if any man build upon this foundation, gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble. And when you see that term precious stones, it doesn't always mean jewels. Granite was considered a precious stone.
Yeah, it is.
Because it's the strongest stone. And if they cut granite blocks to build a building, that building will last for thousands of years. Thousands of years. And so when you see precious stones in the Bible, we tend to think, oh, precious stones, gold and rubies, and no. Those are jewels. They're also precious stones, but don't make the mistake of thinking when they say precious stones that they mean only jewels. Here, he's talking about a strong foundation. Would you rather build on a diamond or a ruby or a big granite block? Big granite block. So here he's talking about strong material. He said some of it's weak, wood, hay, stubble. Why? Set fire to it. Or along comes the wolf and says, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. But he couldn't blow the brick one down, could he? So the brick's really kind of precious stones, although they're man-made. Still, they're a good, strong foundation and building material. So he said there are many different building materials for other verse 12. Now if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, which could be jewels, but it also could be strong granite, other stone blocks, and some of it's wood, hay, and stubble. So there are many different building materials. Small b, time will tell if you use the right ones. When we build and the things we do, the ministries that we do in the church, are they lasting ones or are they ones that are going to disappear? So he tells us in verse 13, every man's work shall be made manifest. That word manifest means openly plain, obvious for anybody to see. Every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire. And the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. And so only time will tell if your ministry is really of God or if it's of you. Those pastors that built the church on their own charisma, I'm afraid they weren't really using the right materials. And that's one of the problems that we have.
3, 14, 15.
All right.
Yeah, I'm in chapter 3, verse 13.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. They may have been godly men, but the people that came to the church and joined the church and stayed because of the man were there for the wrong reason.
Right.
The church that comes to mind, I won't even mention the man's name, but the church that comes to mind had the largest Sunday school meeting ever. Rented warehouses all around the city, a big city, rented warehouses where they could put 500 or 600 people here, and they could put 1,000 people over here, and then we would call it live streaming today, but it wasn't over the internet. They used television, and they would broadcast to this warehouse. There'd be 1,000 people, and there'd be 500 here, and there'd be 2,000-3,000 over there. He had one service. He had like 100 to 150,000 people watching that. He just did it, to see if they could do it. And so that's fine. I mean, you're to reach out to people in that. But many of those people then fell in love with that preacher, and they started coming to church because of the preacher. And when that preacher died, there was a fight. There were about 3 or 4 different people who wanted to take over that church. One of them was his son, I believe. Another one was someone else, maybe a deacon or one of the, well, this particular guy had like a dozen different preachers in his church. Because it was a big church. When you're running 5, 6, 7,000 people in service, one man can only minister to 100 people, maximum. Absolute maximum. Every preacher should be in every member's home at least once a year. At least once a year, they should make a personal visit, even on the regular members that are, coming regular and everything. At least once a year, they should meet with that family. So if you've got over 100 people, you need an associate pastor. I've seen churches where they were taught there's only one pastor in the church, and that's it. Everybody else can be a minister, but there can only be one pastor in the church. Gee, that's funny. My Bible tells me that the leaders of the pastors of the church was Peter, James, and John. Yeah. Why? Because there were so many people there that one man could not pastor all of the people in that church. And so there should be an associate pastor, and the other 100 should be assigned to that associate pastor. Then the next 100, there should be another associate pastor. Why? Because if you have 100 people, generally the offerings are enough that you can take on another full-time staff member. 100 people can easily give enough to not only take care of the needs of the church, but the needs of another staff member and his family. And so those that build upon the person instead of upon Christ, that's wood, hay, and stubble. Yeah. Now, that pastor may not have wanted it. In fact, I heard that particular pastor preach down, and he's not from Texas, wasn't from Texas, but I heard him preach down there, and I heard him tell the preachers, now, this is what I do, but don't you try to be me. Don't try to do what I do. See if it'll work in your city, and if it does, fine. This is just another method, a way of ministering and reaching people, but not every method works everywhere. I had a problem up in Port Angeles, pastored there too. I had a problem up in Ogden when I was pastoring. Got a wonderful family in from Texas. They had the youth ministry that down in Texas, and they were running 50, 60, 70 kids every Sunday. All right? That's in Texas. They came up to Utah. Because of their background, I let them, I said, hey, that'd be great. Why don't you take over the youth ministry? It wouldn't work. See, if you're running 60, 70, 80 kids, and 10 of them don't show up for Sunday school, you probably won't even go visit them. Because that's you still got another 60, 70 kids there. I signed up with a company in Utah and you can tell them how many miles. I said, I want people that move at least 25 miles. It's called a newcomers list. And it only cost me like $20 a month, 15, $20 a month. And at that time in Ogden, North Ogden, and South Ogden, those were the fastest growing areas in Utah. We were getting 50 to 100 new people just about every month. I mean, between those, it used to be one town. They had to divide it into North Ogden, North Ogden, Ogden, and South Ogden. Mm-hmm. And so I would get, I would say 20 to 30 a month were people that had moved at least 25 miles. I didn't want somebody that just moved across the street. They were Mormon here. They moved across the street. They're Mormon over there. All right. I wanted people that moved at least 25 miles. And I used to get 20 to 30 new visits to make a month. Well, this couple from Texas, they thought that was the stupidest thing they ever heard of. Now, that's stupid. They volunteered to call the newcomers. We would call them. introduce ourselves. We'd like to welcome you to the neighborhood,
Yeah.
and anything we can do to help you get settled in and kind of break the ice a little bit. And then maybe the following Saturday, maybe a week later, I would go make a personal visit on it. And I would do that with every newcomer that came in. And even back then, the newcomers were about 30% Hispanic. This valley is now 22 to 25% Hispanic. That means when you walk down the street, 1 out of every 4 or 5 people you see is of Hispanic descent.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it is here. But this couple from Texas, they thought that was stupid. And go visit the kids. What do you mean? If they don't show up, they'll be back next week. No, if they miss 1 week and you don't visit them, the next week, if you don't go visit them, you've only got a 50-50 chance of ever getting them back into church. It takes 2 weeks to form a bad habit and 2 weeks to form a good habit. Down in Texas, if you're running 60, 70, 80 kids and 5 or 10 of them don't show up, it's no big deal, But up here, if they don't show up one Sunday, you better be on their doorstep talking to the kids the next Saturday or Thursday, whatever day, whenever you decide for visitation. Because if you let them go 2 weeks, you only got a 50-50 chance ever getting them back in church. Mm-hmm. So we had no youth ministry. And so the methods that worked in Texas do not work up here in Utah. But the methods we have in Utah, the people in Texas would think you were stalking them. I mean, just, because you can't go 6 blocks. I went to Bible college down in Bedford, Texas, and lived in Irving, and Pastor Mayfield, my daddy in the Lord, pastored a church in Irving. But you couldn't go 6 blocks without finding another Baptist church.
Right.
Yes, it's that's just the way it was. Yeah, here was our church. Within 6 blocks over here, or 6 blocks over here, that's a 12-block area. But within 6 blocks, there was going to be another Baptist church. In fact, the church I went to, the nearest Baptist church was 4 blocks away. Come to think of it, it was just down, just that, up the street, straight north, up on the next main street corner, about 3 or 4 blocks away. And so the methods down there don't work up here. Some of them do, but not all of them. Just like some of our methods will work down there. But if I was on their doorstep that much, they'd probably think I was stalking them. So you can't build a church on the pastor or the staff. It has to be built on Christ. Anything else is wood, hay, or stubble, because it's not a strong foundation like Jesus is. There are many different materials. Time will tell if you use the right ones. That was verse 13. And then verses 14 and 15, your reward depends on its endurance. It's not how much you do. It's does the things that you do last? Do they last, I should say? Or are they just a flash in the pan? I've seen places where, because of the person, the church would grow to be 100, couple 3 months. But then the people didn't stay. They came, they stayed for a short time, but then when they got used to that pastor, especially down in Texas, they just head down the street. They just go down the street. There was no endurance. So the ministries that we do in the local church, it's not how big or how flashy, it's how long is it going to last. Verses 14 and 15. If any man's work abide, that means if it stays, if it carries on. If any man's work abides, which he hath built thereupon, built on the foundation of Christ, that foundation of that local church, he shall receive a reward. If your ministry lasts, you're going to get a reward for it. If any man's work shall be burned, in other words, maybe he died and the ministry just disappeared, or even while he was working it was a flash in the pan for a while, but then after a while it didn't endure. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. Your reward depends on its endurance. This has nothing to do with your salvation. Remember, we're not talking about salvation. We're talking about service. Your service. You're still saved.
Mhm.
But you're saved as if by fire. You're saved to serve, but you served, but it didn't last. It was just a flash in the pan. It didn't endure. So you're still saved, but your work burned out. So your reward depends on not the flash and how big a flame it may be all at once. It depends on how long did it last. Page 12 in the textbook. Number 4, the building, the church, is the temple of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. So the Spirit of God dwells in the church. I'm back in the textbook. The temple is holy, don't defile it, and this is not an optional thing. If anyone sets out to destroy a church, God will kill him. That's under the Old Testament, there was death penalties for sin, all right? But we're not under the law.
Right.
But this is New Testament. This is under grace. If someone sets out to purposely try to destroy a church, God will take them out. He'll move them out of the church. If they won't move, he'll move them out. And then if they won't move, he'll take them out. Isn't that what that says? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy.
Where are you at?
I'm in verse 17, chapter 3, verse 17.
Oh, you're in the Bible.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I read it out of the text, then went back to the Bible.
Okay.
My bad. I'm sorry. Didn't make it plain. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. I can't read that any other way. It's very plain to me. We're not talking about someone that gets into sin and accidentally. We're talking about someone that tries to defile, tries to destroy the church. I've seen people get in church and do everything they could to ruin that church because they were mad at the pastor. They were mad at somebody else in the church. Something upset them. And so they get nasty. They get very nasty. And they're trying to destroy, they're defiling the temple of God. And the same thing with people that get into sin and will not get out. A woman up in Washington, when I first got into church, her and her husband and the 2 kids were in that church for years and years and years. But the problem is the mother would have the kids have a project every year. This year they raise a prize sheep. Okay? Now, it just so happened that the county fair or the state fair, whatever, would be meeting on Sunday. I mean, the fair would be going on. So she'd take the kids out of church to take that prize sheep over. Or next year it might be a calf. Or the next year it might be a goat or prize chickens. And then they would have competitions throughout the year because, you know, you got to win this competition, that one. Then you get to the state fair, the county fair, whatever. She was constantly taking them out of church out to show those different animals. And her husband fought it and fought it and fought it. And he couldn't do it. And it went on so much that when those kids got up, be up 16, 18 years old, they just quit coming to church.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because these other things are more important than the church.
Yeah.
Why would you say that? Well, because Mom took us out of church constantly, over and over and over, took us out of church. She got sick on a Monday. The town it's not a small town, but it's like 5,000 to 6,000 people. But the hospital is just a local hospital.
Mm-hmm.
She got sick and they gave tests. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. So they took her over to the next town, which is a big town. We're talking about, 60, 70, 80,000 people, major hospital, all right? They did tests. They could not figure out what was going on. Her blood she didn't have leukemia, but it was like her blood cells were, the white blood cells were eating the red blood cells. That's what happens with leukemia. Your blood starts destroying it's a false attack. Your body thinks that those blood cells are the enemy. And it's like an immune response kicks up and goes crazy. And that's what happened. And she kept getting sicker and sicker. That Monday, they took her over there on finally Tuesday. They kept her in there. By Friday, she was dead.
Whoa.
I mean, 4 days. From perfect health to stone bone ready to put in the graveyard. And they never did figure out what was going on. They couldn't find a microbe, bacteria. They couldn't find a virus. They couldn't find, she didn't have leukemia. They tested her for that. Just somehow her body went nuts and killed itself. Talked to her husband and her pastor. And you know what they both believed? Now, this is just their opinion. You know, opinions are like armpits. Most everybody has two, and most of them stink. All right? But I'm just saying, the opinion of the husband and the pastor was God finally took her out.
What it sounds like.
I mean, so it's just an opinion, but that's what it sounds like to me. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. And man means anthropos, human beings. It's not just males. It's men, women, children, whatever. Children generally are not held culpable for what they do because they're too young. They don't know. But adults should know better. And so did God take her out? I don't know, but it sure sounded pretty strange to me. And her husband believed it. And so did her pastor. Now, she went to heaven. They both believed she was saved. But wood, hay, stubble. And that's what it was. Her husband was song leader in the church and a Sunday school teacher. And he couldn't depend on his wife to be in church. Now, I'm sure the same thing have happened where the women, in fact, generally, it's the women that are more faithful. And the husband is kind of so-so. If it was not for the women in the 40s, 50s, and on through the 70s and 80s, there would probably be no churches in the United States. That's why the songbooks, the songs are written up. Some of those songs, when Sister Renee plays them, she plays them in the key that's in the book, and I can't get up there. It's because those songs were arranged when 70-80% of the people in church were females. They were the ones who kept the church going. During the 40s, where were the men? War. They were over at war. Who was in church? The women. And the men came back from the war, and they had to go back to work, and they'd been out of church for 2, 3, 4 years. 2 weeks to develop a bad habit, 2 weeks to develop a good habit. So it was generally mostly women that were in the churches all the way from the 40s, then into the 50s and 60s. Then, of course, the hippies hit in the 70s and 80s. So everybody started leaving church, going to the communes, worship God on the mountain, you know, God out in the boat. Dagon, the fish god. No, but they're worshiping something. And so, does that sound like gold, silver, and precious stones? Or does it sound like wood, hay, and stubble? And that's what he's talking about. That's why I asked Pastor Warnicki if we could have 1 Corinthians as a class in the college. It sounds exactly like the churches today. I mean, exactly. What's been happening 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that 50-year period, 60-year period, and now into the 2021, and it's not getting any better. The newest generation that is now, the younger generation that is now having children, according to Pew survey, are more spiritual than their parents, but go to church less. Yeah. They don't believe in organized religion. Why? Well, mom and dad went to church and drug us kids. The only drug, I heard a comedian say one time, the only drug problem we had when I was younger was mom drug us to church on Sunday, and then she drug us to church on Wednesday. And she drug us to Awana's on, that was the only drug problem we had back then. But today, the generation that is now having kids, they're more spiritual than their parents. I'm not saying they're saved. They are looking for something. The millennials, when they come to church, they don't want you to say, well, they ask you a question, why do you do it this way? Well, us Baptists, we've been doing that since Jesus was here. You know what that millennial's going to do? He's going to walk out the door and never come back.
Why? They're
more spiritual than their parents. Church, Jesus, Bible, right?
Yeah.
Church, Jesus, Bible.
Normal.
So when they do want to come to church, they come to church, you don't take them to the Bible. You just tell them, well, us Baptists been doing that since Jesus started the church. They'll never come back. They want you, church, Bible. Okay, show me in the Bible why you do what you do. Don't give me a platitude, which is a hama, 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 Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah. They've heard that their whole life. People giving them a bunch of baloney. The government gives them baloney. Their friends give them baloney. Oh, come on, have one beer. It won't hurt you. I played, when I was a professional musician, I probably played for 250,000 people over a period of 25 years. I never met a drunk that started with his second beer.
Yeah.
I never met a druggie that started with his second fix. Everybody starts with the first one. So that, one's not going to hurt you, that's a lie of the devil. And so when they come to church, they've heard all this their whole life, from the government on down. Only about 30% of the millennials trust the government. They don't trust the government. And when they come to church, they want you to take them to the Bible and show them why you believe what you believe. Otherwise, they're not going to come back. The average person that comes to church has made up their mind in the first 5 minutes after they come in the door whether they're going to come back next week. Now, wait a minute. They haven't heard any songs in the song service. They haven't heard any preaching. How can they make up their mind in the first 5 minutes? Some say 8 minutes. Most of them say 5 minutes. It's the way that they're treated when they come in the church. How you doing? We got the best church in the world. We've got the best Sunday school in the world. Our teachers are the greatest Sunday school teachers in the world. You're supposed to work on the first date principle. The first date you have with a woman, if a man talks about himself the whole time, there's probably never going to be a second date. Am I right or wrong?
You're right.
Yeah. It's the same way when they come to church. If they come in and I do nothing but talk about my church and don't ask anything about them, right, or try to find out what their needs are, they're going to go, they've been doing that to me my whole life. I'll go down the street. In fact, maybe I'll never go to another church because I thought it was a bunch of baloney anyway. Wood, hay, stubble, not precious stones, and then gold and silver to make things look nice spiritually, but built on a granite foundation. And this is the foundation. Jesus Christ is the living word. This is the written word. And so the church has to be built on this, not on because we've been doing that. We've been singing those songs since Jesus was here. Our style of gospel music did not exist 150 years ago.
Right.
It didn't exist.
No.
Amazing Grace and the Old Rugged Cross, those songs are less than 150 years old. Mm-hmm. And when that era started 150 years ago, they didn't play instruments in church. Yeah. Eventually, a couple of hundred years ago, they started playing the organ in church, but they wouldn't play the piano. You know why? No. It was a bar instrument.
Yeah. Oh.
They played it in all the bars. Oh, we can't have it in the church.
God forbid a guitar, huh?
Oh, guitar, forget that. In fact, do you know the song Amazing Grace was arranged for guitar first? It was written, and they came to church, and the old pump organ, that was the only instrument they allowed. They didn't allow piano. Pump organ, because the piano was a bar instrument. Pump organ was broke. They worked with a big bellows, and the bellows blew a hole or something. Oh. So they couldn't get any air to go through to play the pump organ. But the song leader played guitar. So before church, the preacher wrote the song that night, gave it to the song leader the next morning. Pump organ's broken, but he did play guitar, and he arranged it for the guitar. But I know preachers today won't let me play my guitar in church because it's of the devil.
Well, we had a big battle with a pastor on drums.
Yeah. Can anybody tell me the first mention of drums in the Bible?
It was
they say they're not there.
David going through.
They're called tabrets. They were and the word tabret means to drum in Hebrew. It was about 24 inches across. It was a drum head with cymbals around the edge. We'd call it a tambourine, but not the one that's hollow. The ones like the old Salvation Army used to use.
Yeah, like this.
Yeah, they had a drum head on them. Yeah. And so when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, Miriam and the women led the worship songs, coming out playing tabrets and singing before the Lord. That's the first mention of drums in the Bible. I've never met I've never seen a scripture in the Bible that says drums are instruments of war. Do you know what the instruments of war are in the Bible? Trumpets.
Trumpets, yeah.
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 Yeah, that's right.
Blow the trumpet and the walls fall down.
Right.
New Testament, if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who will know to go to battle? And so many things that we do when these people come in, especially the millennials, which are the next generation that's going to run these churches after we go in the grave, the body in the grave, and the soul goes to be with God, they're the ones that are going to run these churches, but we're not winning them. Why? Because there's too much blah, 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 wah, 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 and not enough taking them to the Bible. Wood, hay, stubble. But some of these things are preached and have been preached for 100 years. Why? Well, because the charismatics started using drums and tambourines, so they must be of the devil. Well, then you better throw out this book too, because many of them used the King James Bible, because it was the only Bible around at that time. So they used the King James Bible. Are we going to throw it away too? Now, wait a minute. We can't use a piano. They still play them in bars. Cocktail lounges have a pianist in there. I know, I was in the business for 25 years. I had friends that played in cocktail lounges where that's what they did. They sat there, sang, and played the piano. So that means we can't have a piano in church either. The instrument is neutral. I've never met a gun that decided it was going to go out and kill someone.
Yeah.
People kill people.
Yes, they do.
Well, they dropped the gun and it accidentally went off. Well, no, is it the gun's fault or the person that dropped it?
The person.
Person that loaded it.
Yeah, the person that loaded it or kept it loaded instead of keeping it empty until they were ready to use it. Those are just instruments that can be used by God's people or the devil's people.
Yeah.
If they're used by the devil's people or if God's people use them in the wrong way, wood, hay, stubble. If they use them in the right way, precious stones. And it's a beautiful edifice. That's what the gold and silver are for. They would take something like this, and they would take gold and beat it so thin that they could take gold and put it on this wood and tap it in, and gold can be made so thin you can see the grain of the wood through the gold.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it can be spread that thin that you can see, and this is artificial wood with big things, but I'm talking about real wood that has like this grain.
Yeah.
You can actually put gold on there and Aaron fashioned it with the hammer. That's what it said when they made the golden calf.
Uh-huh.
And that's what he was doing. He would lay plates, they'd build it, pound it out into things as thin as a piece of paper or thinner, and lay it on there and tap it with a hammer. And you could actually see the grain of the wood through the gold. And it made the gold beautiful. Right? Silver, precious stones. Silver, gold, precious stones, or wood, hay, stubble. And so when we preach or we teach some of the things that just because we've done it that we sang these songs since Jesus was here. Well, no, that's funny because the first churches were Jewish, 100% Jewish. No Gentiles, or maybe one or two. Those original churches were Jewish.
Sure they were.
And they sang the Psalms. And many of the Psalms were not even sung. They were strummed beautifully on a harp.
Yeah.
And then they would recite, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Ding, 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 ding. Leadeth me beside the still water. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Twong, twong, nah. Walking through the valley of the shadow of death. I'll fear no evil." That's the way many of them were. Does that sound like any of the music you've heard in church since you've been born? No. Methods have to change. The message foundation can never change. But the methods have to change. Well, I didn't find it in the Bible. Okay, then we got to throw away our automobiles that we use to go out soul winning. Oh, now wait a minute. I got to throw away my Bible too, because they didn't have the printed page back then. They had handwritten copies that individuals couldn't even own unless they were rich. They would have one Bible in a whole church, if they were lucky. In fact, when they first started, they only had a couple of books. The Ephesians had the letter to the Ephesians. And the Laodiceans, when you get done reading it here at Ephesus, make a couple copies and take one over to Laodicea, so they got a copy too. And then take another one over to this church. So we'd have to throw away the Bible. In fact, we can't use printed material because the pornographers print their material, so we got to throw all the printing presses away.
Yeah.
See, you can use it for God or you can use it for the devil. It's an instrument.
Yes.
And that's all they are. Methods have to change. Oh, we can't be doing this live stream either. I don't find live streaming in the Bible. In fact, I don't find those lights in the Bible. We're going to have to take all those lights out and put some lamps in here. Have you ever been in a building lit by a lamp?
No.
Storms. We still, in our apartment over there, we still have a lamp. Yep. And when the lights go out, we light the lamp. And you can see about 4 feet. Maybe 6 if you're lucky. All right. So if you're going to read, you set the lamp right there.
Yeah.
So you can read. All right. And so wood, hay, stubble. These things are just instruments. The methods have to change to reach the current generation that is used to those methods. Sunday school the same way. You used to be able to get away with flannel graph. Okay. Now you need to put everything up on the TV screen. Why? Because that's what those kids are used to. Now, I'm not saying you can't use flannel graph. The kids still love them. But you better mix some modern methods in with it in order to keep them coming. Otherwise, it's just wood, hay, and stubble. It's not going to last. So to get back to where we are here, if we do not build with lasting substance, then we're defiling the temple of God. Why? Well, because we're trying to use a foundation that's sandstone. You know what sandstone is?
Like stone washed away with water.
Yeah, Arizona, all those beautiful, even southern Utah, but all those beautiful sculptured mountains and that, most of those are sandstone. The rain kind of softens it up, the wind comes along and is slowly blowing particles off. And over the centuries, it's beautiful, but I wouldn't want to build anything on that. I want granite. I want something solid. Today we would say concrete. Yeah, I want concrete for the foundation, not sandstone, because as the wind comes along, and the devil's going to blow hard to blow your house down, slowly he can wear that away. That's a church built on a person. It's being worn away by the devil. Instead of being built on Christ, and there ain't nothing the devil can do against that foundation. But we got to be careful how we build on it. Although Paul set the foundation of Christ, as we come along and build on it, we better make sure we build with beautiful things like silver and gold, that makes it look nice. But we have to also make sure that we use precious stones. We use enduring substances, enduring ministries. Otherwise, we lose our reward. The Spirit of God dwells in the church. The temple is holy. Don't defile it. And this is not an optional thing. God will destroy us if we set out and try to defile the church. That was verse 17. Now we're going to get on to verses 18 through 20. He said, don't deceive yourselves. Well, yeah, but this charismatic preacher, and he's got thousands of people coming, and he believes he's doing a wonderful work for God, and maybe his motive is pure. I'm not saying that person did that on purpose, but he did not instruct the members well enough in that, hey, if you're coming for me, you might as well just get up and leave because you didn't come to worship God. That thing was Whitfield. Those of you that came to worship Whitfield, you're free to leave.
Yeah.
Those that came to worship God, you can stick around and we'll worship God. Same kind of principle here. Sometimes we think that we're doing a ministry for God that's precious stones and gold and silver. But he said, don't deceive yourselves. Verses 18 to 20. Verse 18. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. If I'm wise in the world, then I need to get rid of the worldly wisdom and become just a fool, an uneducated simpleton, and then let God work on me. But if I'm so wrapped up in myself and the things that I'm doing for God, God can't work on me. Why? I won't let him.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let him. Stiff-necked. Hard heart. No. He said if we're hard-hearted, stiff-necked, and we're so, hey, I've got this figured out. I know this ministry will work, and I know that one's going to work over here, and we can get in, and I'll get you to come and help me, and we'll get into that and everything, and we're going to work it out because we're wise in the ways of the world. We're going to market the church with worldly principles. He said, don't deceive yourself. He said, if you're wise in the ways of the world, why don't you get rid of those and become foolish in the ways of the world? Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. Well, how could that be? I've now become foolish in the ways of the world. Now I'm going to go on to the next verse. If I refuse to let God work on me, then God will trip you up in your own worldly wisdom. Verses 19 and 20. For the wisdom of this world, remember, if you're wise in the ways of the world, the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. Those that are all wrapped up in themselves, they get so wrapped up in themselves that God says, I'm just going to trip you up a little bit. I'm going to throw a monkey wrench into the works over here. And it doesn't take much. Remember the old saying? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Sometimes God will let Christians do that. They get wise and he works on them and they're not going to listen. So he just, okay, go ahead. Now I'm still working on you, but I'm not going to stop you. In Sunday school, I've been teaching on the women of the Bible. The greatest gift and the greatest curse that God gave mankind was free will. When I use my free will and by my own free will decide to follow God, it's the greatest blessing there is. But if I use my own free will and decide not to follow God, it's a curse. So it's the greatest blessing. Even the philosophers will say that which can cause us the most pleasure is capable of causing us the most pain. What hurts worse than anything else?
Broken heart.
To have a spouse or a sweetheart, okay, that you love and they can give you the most emotional pleasure. You're just in love and then they run off with somebody else. So that which can give us the most pleasure is capable of causing us the most pain. And so God says, okay, you're having all this pleasure in yourself. I keep working on you. I want you to turn away from the wisdom of the world, wrapped up in yourself, and I want you to turn back to me. God's saying that. But I'm not going to stop you because you have free will. Sometimes he only lets us get this high, and then he knocks the pins out from under us. But then if we don't listen, he'll let us get this high. I'd rather fall. I've made myself a rule. I don't go up on a ladder over about 3 or 4 steps now. That's my rule. Because in the last 3 years, I've fallen off the ladder 3 times.
Yeah, it took a long time for you to learn.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And the last time I fell, there is a good side to having wrinkles.
It's scarred.
Can you see that scar?
Yeah.
It's right there in that wrinkle. It's actually a scar that's 1 inch long and a 1/4 inch wide. But it's right in that wrinkle above my eyebrow. So at my age, you can't even tell. When the ladder twisted, I fell off and it fell on its side. And when I came down, my head hit right on that aluminum ladder. And that split me wide open. I just pushed it together and butterflied it with a Band-Aid, put, triple antibiotic on it. Never did get infection or anything. But I'm going, God, I'm trying to do what I thought you wanted me to do. I thought. That's the problem. I thought.
Yeah, okay.
I thought this. Old preacher used to tell me, we get in the biggest trouble when we have eye trouble.
Nice.
I thought I'd do this. I thought that's what you want. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. No. As Brother Mullins was talking in the Romans class, we can't do anything. We can only let God work through us. And then we're not doing it, but God's Holy Spirit working in us and through us. And so here he says, listen, if we're wise in the ways of the world, we need to get unwise. We need to get foolish in the ways of the world. Why? Because that stuff we thought is wisdom, God says that's nothing but foolishness. And that's what it said in verse 19. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, he taketh the wise in their own craftiness. They're making schemes and they're doing this and that. And he says, I'll use your own scheme to mess you up. I'm going to take you in your own craftiness. Verse 20. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise. Remember, in context, what he's talking about. Wisdom of the world. He's talking about the wise in the ways of the world. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. They may think they're doing God's business. I mean, that's why they stoned Stephen to death. And Paul stood there. He was Saul at the time, before he was converted and got a new name, Paul. He was Saul. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He didn't want to get his hands dirty with the blood of Stephen. So he said, I'll tell you what, you guys need to be able to throw some pretty big rocks at that guy. I'll hold your coats.
Yeah.
So that's what he did. He held the coats and let them stone Stephen to death because he didn't want to get his hands dirty with all that blood. See, he was crafty. So what did God have to do with him?
Knock
Knock him off his donkey and show the glory of God and blind him. He took him in his own craft. He thought he could see what God wanted him to do, persecute the Christians. Since that's what he saw, I believe that here I'm seeing the Old Testament and I'm reading what God said and I'm persecuting these heretics over here. I see what's really going on. God said, tell you what, I'll just take your eyes away. Take the wise in their own craftiness. If that's what it took for Paul, that's what God did to Paul. He said, you think you can see what's going on? You know what's going on? And you see the Old Testament? He was knowledgeable in the Old Testament. That's why God used him to write the book of Hebrews, where he compared the Old Testament and Christ. And he talked about the Melchizedek, and etc. I heard I read something a guy wrote the other day about Melchizedek was this king from over here and over there. Gee, that's funny because according to the Bible, Melchizedek didn't have a mother or a father.
Right.
He didn't.
He just appeared.
Well, now, wait a minute. Who was he? He wasn't just a regular human being.
No.
It's called a Christophany. A theophany is when God's finger and hand appeared and wrote on the wall in the Old Testament. That's called a theophany. An appearance of God that they could see that little bit. All right? A Christophany is an appearance of Christ in physical form in the Old Testament before he was born. Melchizedek was a Christophany. He had to be. He had no children. He had no mother, no father. He had to be Christ. Or an angel, because they have no mother or father. They're not a race. They're a group created by God. A race means mothers and fathers giving birth to kids. You know, mom and dad angel giving birth to little angels. No, that's not the way it works. God creates them outright. All right? And so Paul thought in his craftiness, he figured out ways to arrest these Christians. He had warrants from Jerusalem. He had that legal authority to take them and put them in prison and all that, have them stoned to death. I'll hold your coats and all that. God says, you think you can see everything that's going on? You got it all figured out? I'll just take your eyeballs away. I heard old preachers say quite a few times, he said, you know, when you're flat on your back, it's easy to look up to God.
Yes.
Because you can't see any other direction. If you're flat on your back, the only way you can look is up. Yeah. Sometimes God has to knock us flat on our back. So we'll quit looking this way and we'll look that way. Sometimes God has to take our ability to see away. Because we're so involved in seeing the world and wise in the world. He said, oh, well, Paul, I think the only way I'm going to get your attention is I'm going to take your eyeballs away. Now, he gave him back. He gave him back his sight later. but one of those that he was persecuting and hailing to the judge and to the tormentors and that, and having some of them stoned to death and all that. Those believers, God sent one of them to heal him. God says, you think you got it all figured out? You can see what's going on? I'll take your eyeballs away, and those that you thought you were persecuting in the name of God, I'll use one of them to give you back your sight. Sound pretty radical to me, but sometimes God's got to be that way. Why? Because we get so wise in the world that we won't turn to the Bible to get the wisdom of God. We want to think we got it all figured out. There are many times in my life I thought I had things figured out. I found out later that God didn't. When I pastored up in Ogden, when I went there, I thought, God put me here to build a big church. That's not what he did at all. He put me there to save the property, to win some souls, so that a Spanish church could be started in that building, and they've been using that building free of charge for 15 years. No, 19 years. Oh, wow. Never charged them a penny of rent. I still own the building. I'm the one on the papers. Every year I have to apply for and get our tax exempt. I'm still officially the pastor of that church according to the state of Utah. Right. So I thought that's what God, and I couldn't understand why. I mean, I was winning souls, but the church just stayed about 25, 30 people. And eventually we closed it, moved down here because Bonnie came down with cancer. And then we put a Hispanic pastor in. We've gone through, I think, 3 of them. We're on our 3rd one now. But the one that's there now, he's been there 10, 12 years, something like that, doing a good job. But see, that's what God had in mind, not what I thought I had. I had that all figured out. And I was really discouraged when it wouldn't work. That's because I was trying to do it in the wisdom of the world, not in the wisdom of God. My motive was pure. I mean, I really believe that's what God sent me there to do. And he did send me there to win souls. I mean, we won a lot of people. But then when we closed that for a year and then reopened it as a Hispanic work, because of that and moving it down here, that's the only reason y'all are here tonight studying. Because that's what he did. He moved me down here to work in the church, in the college, and work in the church along with Pastor Warnicke Sr. And so sometimes we think we got it all figured out. But God might have to do something radical to get our attention and say, no, you're still operating in the wisdom of the world that you think you got it all figured out. In fact, the Bible says, unless the Lord build the house, they that labor in vain. You can beat your brains out, and that church is never going to grow. You can beat your brains out as a layperson in the church, working Sunday school ministries or whatever, being a faithful member, tithing, and, attending church and all that. But none of that's going to work unless the Lord build the house. They that labor in vain. And that's what he was talking about, that the verse 20, and again the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. They're empty, useless. So it's not that we should quit working, it's just that we should keep working. I think I said this in Sunday school last week or the week before. The wrong way to serve in a church is, God, I started this ministry, come along and bless it. No, that's eye trouble. I started this ministry, come along and bless it. What it is God, I'll do whatever you want. Now show me what it is. Now whose responsibility is it to show me what he wants me to do? It's not mine anymore. I don't have to worry about figuring out what to do. I just tell God, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I told him that in Bible college, and we're out of time. Told him that in Bible college. I said, you want me to preach the gospel? Point at the Bible. You want me to sing the gospel? Point at my guitar. You want me to wash toilets? Point at a toilet. He put me in 3 toilets. One was a church that had just gone through a split, and it was a rebuilding. Another one was in the middle of a split, and another one was about to split. It was like washing toilets spiritually. This group that left would not talk to the other group. I mean, they were family, but they would not talk to each other because we're serving God. No, we're serving God. Doesn't that sound like 1 Corinthians? I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Christ, etc., etc., etc. But I did find out one thing, that when God puts you in to wash a toilet, when you get done washing a toilet, what do?
Wash your hands.
You close the lid, walk away, and wash your hands. You don't stay there with your head in the toilet. I find the one that rebuilds a church that had already split, or the one that's in the middle, the church was in the middle of the split, and that pastor then, I was able to get those two groups back together. God forgives, but people generally don't. Those two groups went back together. We got a pastor installed. They ran off 2 more preachers after that before they finally got one that was there and loved God enough and was going to stick it out. Okay? So I find that when you wash a toilet, if you're the one that God uses, you're going to get some of the filth on you. Even if you're not guilty, I don't care how careful you are, you're going to get some of that toilet on you. Generally, the one that washes the toilet cannot then stay. Why? Because some of the dirt's got on you. And some of those people are not going to forget or forgive. God forgives, but people generally don't. They generally don't. And so I find the one that washed the toilet is going to have to leave and help them get someone else in there to pastor that church. Because the people that stay after the washing of the toilet, generally some of them are not going to forgive the pastor, and that's like a little sore, a little ulcer that's going to get worse and fester, worse and worse, and then the church will die of blood poisoning. Okay? So, I was on page
12.
Page 12, we'll pick up with E. That would be page 12 and E. Any quick questions or comments?
You know, I was just thinking, we were talking about the people leaving Christianity and that around the 40s and that. And I think maybe the Holocaust had a lot to do with that, because when I was a kid, I didn't know that existed.
It's going to be in
But
November.
then my stepdad, who fought in the war,
it's going to be
a lot of it had nothing to do with God after that. Because it wasn't just that he was in Burma, but it was the fact that he seen the film. They had showed those films to all the soldiers from all theaters of war, had seen those, including the enemy, had seen those films.
Yeah.
And a lot of them just, that was it. They didn't have
You know why they call them the Holocaust? Old Testament Hebrew term meaning the burnt offering.
Ooh.
That's what the term Holocaust is taken from, the Hebrew term that means a burnt offering. It was called a Holocaust. You bring the offering to God, divide it up, put it on the fire, and burn it. That's Holocaust, a burnt offering. Okay? So that's why they chose that term, because what did they do with the Jews? They gassed them with xylon gas or whatever it was.
Yeah.
They gassed them, and then they put them in crematoriums and burned them up. Right? Okay, so that could be one of the reasons is a lot of them, and not only that, a lot of them saw that they're on the battlefield talking to their friend, and all of a sudden, pop, and his head disappears. You shoot a guy in the forehead with a bullet or in the side of the head with a bullet, you know what happens? It blows the other side and takes most of the brain along with it. And so a lot of guys saw stuff like that. I mentioned that in Sunday school. I hear this over and over. How could a good God allow something like that to happen? It's because he gave us free will. He gave us free will. And we can decide to use it to follow God or decide to use it to not follow God, which means we're following the devil. And whence cometh wars and fightings, even of the lust in your members. People are the reason that wars exist. It's not God. It's God allowed us to have free will, and we make the wrong decisions. And when there have been more wars to end, since the war to end all wars, that's what they call the First World War, and then they carried it on into the Second World War. It's supposed to be the war to end all wars. We have had more wars and more people killed since then than in all of history before that.
Right.
Yeah. Why? Not because of God, it's because of people deciding not to follow God. They're using their free will to go the other direction. Okay? Any other comments or questions?
Very good.
Would you? Thank you. Praise the Lord. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be here. Remember, they found my cancer before it became malignant, and Yeah. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Would you dismiss us in prayer?
Aye. Dear Father, thank you for this night, this evening, togetherness, what we've learned today and studied on. Thank you for our preacher and our teacher. Please give us safety home until we come again tomorrow. Once again, we thank you for all that you are or ever will be for us. Thank you for your gift of your Son for our salvation.
Yes.
Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you all for coming tonight. And I'm going to get us offline. I'm going to try it this way.